All right, so this is going to be exciting, a little bit different. That's the last session of the day, right, Jamie? All right, the last serious session of the day. How long do we have? 40 minutes, right. 38. 38, so it's 9.5 minutes each. All right, so I've got here with me, in addition to Keith and Dilip that you've heard, we've got Phil from TSIA, who is going to, who's a new, who is planned to be on this session. But I also grabbed Tony Colon, who I met him at Salesforce and now is at Cisco, to join us on the panels. This is like the all-star panel. I mean, no offense to anyone else, but these are practitioners that have spent many, I enjoy talking to them about customer success. So usually my panels are faster a little bit, and I don't like agreements. So let's go have a fight a little bit. All right, so we're going to talk about scaling customer success. So why don't we start with Phil and Tony? Just introduce yourself quickly, and we'll get going.
Sure. So thank you for the invite. So I met, as Guy said, I've been at Salesforce was at Salesforce for 10 years, and helped really start the customer success group. If anyone's familiar with it, it used to be called Customers for Life, and now I've rejoined a few of the leaders that have migrated over to Cisco to bring some of the magic that we did at Salesforce to Cisco.
Sure. Phil Nanus, I work for the Technical Services Industry Association, or TSIA. We are a research institution, so we work with member companies, provide research frameworks, guidance to help them get better at the business of one of 10 practices. The one that I work on is customer success. But for the 12 years, to the last 12 years, I've worked in customer success as a practitioner before I joined TSIA, so I was in the ranks of all of you. I ran customer success at Symantec and at Infor prior to joining TSIA.
All right, so thank you all. Audience, if you have questions, just raise your hands. We're not going to wait till the end. I'm sure that things are going to come up quickly. So let's start with the first question. What's the inspiration of customer success in your business, right? It's kind of more of the why, not the how. We'll talk about the how in a second. Dilip, maybe you can start.
See, as I said, in Dimension Data, we have always the 4 lenses that we can apply. Is it the financial lens? Is it the client lens? Is it the operational lens? Or is it just the people? Always go through the 4 lenses, because most of our answers are not necessarily common across all. So for me, the big one for me, client success, was absolutely relevant because we started seeing the premium offers getting discounted, as I said, and attackers taking the market share.
So competitive.
And revenue. It's
you start
absolutely
losing market share, and you felt that you have to change the way in which
absolutely.
you do business.
Absolutely.
Keith, what about SAP? Why customer
Yeah,
success?
I would say it definitely started out being financially driven and retention driven. Those were the most important metrics in the early days. It has evolved to be much more balanced in terms of true customer success, meaning the customer is getting the outcomes that they desire, and then the fruits of that will come to us. So the retention, the expansion, et cetera. But make no mistake, financial metrics are very much of interest to the people that fund our endeavors.
Phil, what are the triggers that you see, the common top 3 triggers that you see in companies you consult with?
Triggers for why they've started customer success?
Yeah, why? I mean, we talk a lot about the how, which is the right approach, but I think it's hard to do the how without understanding the motivation of the business. I remember, just to come, when I asked Ken Hamill in SAP, why now? Because we've been talking for 3 years. The answer was 50% of our business is cloud, so that's the time to do it.
Yeah, it's definitely, the pivot towards recurring. I think once a company takes between 10 and 15% of their total business is recurring, they realize that they have to manage that completely different. So to us, the why is all about the effective technology adoption that leads to higher retention and expansion rates.
And Tony, you can give 2 answers.
Well, Salesforce was easy. It's 100% cloud-based SaaS model, so it was 2 things: adoption and attrition. Adoption of the products, and then reducing attrition of net new of existing contracts. And Cisco
yeah,
is
that's
sort
an
of
interesting
actually,
question, right?
it's actually Phil's answer, which is now they're shifting from perpetual to recurring, and they really need to, same thing when I joined Salesforce, stop the leaky bucket.
Got it. All right, great answers. So the next question, let's go in the other direction, because you all have experience with that. What's the inspiration? What is customer success in your own words, right? What does it need to look like? Not the outcome of it, but what's the structure of it? What's the dream here?
So kind of the evolution that we were moving towards at Salesforce was away from that adoption attrition mentality to, again, value-based models. The ultimate vision is that customer success is the pillar. Just like when you think of sales, you think of CRM. When you think of customer success, it sort of started in sort of the fluffy relationship management, not very data-driven. And I think we're seeing that shift happen in this new model. And I think that is the ultimate holy grail with companies like Totango and other companies starting to pop up in this space.
We define the what as it's the intersection between the promise of your technology and the customer's business outcome. I think we heard a lot from Edgar this morning around culture, and I felt myself shaking my head a lot during that conversation, and that's really, really critical that companies get that right. And what I would say is that when companies are effectively doing that, it's not only going to move the customer's business outcome, and you're trying to drive that, whether it's a horizontal solution that you provide or a vertical solution that you provide, but ultimately you'll reap those rewards as a supplier of technology.
So like a quick follow-up question. So you think we're just in the beginning of what we're seeing, customer success? Where is this going?
We're in the second inning of a 9-inning game.
Yeah.
So the long game is we spent a lot of time drinking our own Kool-Aid inside of customer success. I've been doing this since 2007. And most of the conversations are about us. It's about us as the supplier. There's a whole host of conversations around really trying to drive the customer's business outcome. So when you look at your scorecards and you look at a lot of metrics and measurements, we see the basics, literally things that you could lift from your organization and put in any one of your peers' organization. Ultimately, what's going to drive the needle are moving your customers' outcomes, whether they're in financial services or in healthcare. It's their business that we have to be focused on.
Yeah, I mean, Phil kind of stole my answer at the end there. I mean, so I'm trying to find a reason to disagree with him, just to fulfill your fantasy of a fight.
What gets you to fight? Don't worry, we are just getting warmed.
No, but if we can close that loop in terms of delivering on the promise, the thing that is interesting to me when I look at why we bought cloud solutions, it isn't always just to get a financial benefit. There's other reasons why we want to buy cloud solutions. It's agility, it's speed, it's time to value, those types of things.
Don't read from the slides.
Oh, geez. That must have been subliminally in my head. Those things, if we can start to measure some of those outcomes, some of the more intangible things, because ultimately, I had a boss several years ago, the lady who is now the CEO of Hertz. She used to say that the customer isn't this big company. The customer is the person sitting across the table from you. So if we can bring customer success to a point of understanding what does success mean for that person sitting across the table making that decision, that to me would be the holy grail, if we get to that level.
So what do you think, Dilip?
For me, let me just kind of, one word, CSM is the new sales.
So do you think the old sales is going to stay, or
Why?
is it going to go
Why?
away?
I think there are 4 big paradigm changes that we are seeing. One, services are getting more productized now. So as the services get more productized, you will start seeing that the language required to sell the services, the product guys will not have, number one. Number 2, services will start pulling through products, not the other way around. And number 3, I think the transactional and relationship selling is taking a backseat. Because in the last 20 to 30 years, clients were pretty much buying a function and a feature. Today they're buying an outcome. And to buy an outcome, somebody with the language of the business and outcome is the only one who can make a difference. Okay, so I think these are the 3 or 4 big things that we can see in the marketplace. But for me, the biggest one is services-led. It's getting an offer-led, platform delivered, moving from relationship to much more strategic engagement.
So I'm going to jump in. I'm going to
Yeah,
answer your
go
question.
ahead.
So sales does not go away, but if you do customer success effectively, sales and marketing costs have got to move south.
Yeah.
They got to go lower if you do that right. It's effective adoption that leads to higher
Yep.
retention and expansion, but you should be making your sales organization more efficient.
Got it. Any question from the audience now? So start thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just curious about the scorecard. You say you can take your scorecard and put it in any other company. What is on your scorecard right now? Can you share?
So I work with 130 companies. So when I look at their scorecards, I see what I call the basics. So there's 6 ways that we feel that you could scale customer success. One is what we call operationalizing the customer journey. What that is you basically take your journey map, which about 50% of CS organizations do, and then half of that half, like a Mona Lisa, they actually just leave it on the wall and don't do anything with it, unfortunately. The other half actually do something with it, right? They're creating success plans and playbooks that align to that journey. For those companies, we see a 3% higher median retention rate increase. But to actually play that out, it means that they're actually helping solve the customer's business outcome. Most of the playbooks that we see are flat out generic. How do you run a QBR? How do you run an escalation? So those are, when we look across the landscape, across our 100+ companies that we work with, they're just very generic and vanilla type playbooks. And we think that that needs to significantly advance.
Yeah, so with that we agree obviously with the idea of success blocks where you can basically capture 80% of what everyone is doing and productize it and just focus on the 20% which is unique for your business. I think this is like a, we are 100% in agreement, but I would ask, Tony, from your perspective, only a few weeks into Cisco, but I remember talking to you, and I don't want to expose private conversation, but your peers that moved from Salesforce to Cisco had a very hard time to apply the Salesforce model to Cisco and start to think about all sorts of other ideas. So where is this thinking right now? Is customer success uniformal, right? You can actually standardize it and adapt to the products and services that you sell, or is it different for every business, and for that reason, CEOs should pay a lot of money for success executives to figure this out?
So, loaded question. I will say that coming from a SaaS, 100% SaaS company to a company that's moving more into SaaS is that the scorecard for a SaaS-based company that's purely born digital is pretty simple, right? The people, the success managers were all measured in a certain way around adoption and attrition. They were on leverage plans, so they were treated more like professional services employees versus more sales-based. They didn't carry a quota. Renewals was a separate team within customer success. So you had a renewals team that focused on the renewal. You had the success manager that focused on adoption. And you had sales chasing new logos. In the shift in a Cisco model is unique because you can take some of the elements, but there's much more of an advantage actually because we're actually going to do more automation than Salesforce, which sounds very counterintuitive. Salesforce was very heavily relationship-based, very little automation, a lot of data on the companies that we had. With a Cisco, you're sort of starting with a data foundation and then layering on humans, kind of like with Dimension Data. So I do see a bit of a paradigm shift. We can take the principles, but it's not an easy one-to-one match.
But do you think that, let's say that the advanced Cisco model, which starts with data and then layers engagement on top of that, could that be applied back into the Salesforce model?
It can, because that's where now Salesforce is. As their companies are getting more mature, again, there are 150,000 customers going from mom and pops all the way up to enterprise. And they started in that space and they continue to be in that space. And the other challenge or uniqueness about a company like Salesforce is they acquire so many companies a year, so many products a year. All of those products that you bring into market always have higher attrition rates. So if your customer success organization is measured on attrition, that new company is always going to drive up attrition higher, and you need to have some sort of segmentation modeling, which again is sort of what we're starting at Cisco, and the pace of innovation is there, but the acquisition is less than a company like Salesforce.
So let's kind of continue this line of investigation, if you will, but add also a little bit data. Right? Let's talk a little bit more. Let's kind of add this data, because I think, you know, we can argue or we can make a debate whether data is critical for customer success, but I think everyone that is here is in the school of thought that customer success starts with data, and then everything else is layered on top of that. But data is a very, I would say, you know, compound word, right? You gotta unpack it a little bit. So how would you unpack it as well?
Well, I think data is a lever. When I started in 2007, it was a bunch of smart people, Microsoft Excel. You know, it was an expensive model. So, you know, I think data is a lever to really leverage your organization to scale it in some way, shape, or form. And I think it's as simple as that. So the collaboration between product teams and success teams is absolutely critical. Collaboration with success teams and other points inside the company is critical. But I view data as an absolute lever to scale.
And Keith, you see this a little bit differently. If I understand correctly, intelligent enterprise is more than just having the data, is actually doing something a little bit more involved in it. So, you know, how do you kind of add into what Phil was saying?
Yeah, I think the lever analogy is a good one. We intend to take the data and execute based on that data. And the more we can do that in an automated, highly efficient way, the better. Again, we think we'll be able to scale the business more. And this really goes beyond our customer success initiative. It's kind of permeated throughout our whole business. I mean, we're doing machine learning to process invoice matching for our ERP customers. So this idea of using data and things like AI and machine learning and applying that to data and predictive analytics allows, I think, you to automate some of the more mundane tasks. It allows you to see things you didn't recognize. That's where the predictive piece comes in. And then you're still, to your point earlier, you're always going to have things that don't stand out in the data. You can't nurture a relationship just with data alone. So you can free up your people to focus on the things that you can't automate or streamline through data. So we try to look at it, you know, from multiple dimensions when we talk about the intelligent enterprise, and I think, you know, it's very applicable in the customer success world.
So Dilip, you're a natural born COO, right? You've said that, and you've actually practiced that. I've seen this myself. But data is very challenging as well, right? Data is, you know, every conversation starts with data, and there's a lot of friction in data. What's the magic? How do you solve this thing? Or can you even solve it?
Correct. Guy, in management, there's only two ways of looking at things, correct? One which you can expect and the other one which you can inspect. The only thing that you can inspect is data. Correct? What you inspect, you can improve. What you expect never gets done. Correct? So coming back again from a data point of view, there's structured data, there's unstructured data. There's internal data, there's external data. There's financial data, there's operational data. And I can tell you the whole magic is how do you bring this data into a data lake. And today I'll tell you from a board point of view, we put 2 data points, and I think Deepak made a good point of it from Deloitte, saying how do you go back to the board and tell the board, look, the investments from CSM is paying off. For the first time, I can tell you in the last 6 to 9 months in my board pack, we have a layer waterfall. And it very clearly say on the layer waterfall, what is the growth from L, A, E, and R? So what's the impact analysis as well? It's outstanding to see that if the board starts seeing the narrative, starts seeing the investments that we put behind CSM, which technically means we are having zero churn, higher expansion, higher renewals, good. That's from a board point of view. Now coming to operations, I did tell you that we need to constantly drive innovation. When I say innovation, drive more automation, drive more knowledge management, drive more first call resolution, drive more first day resolution, drive more first visit resolve. How do you do this? Data is the reason for transformation. Without data, you have no means. In fact, I'll tell you data, the one that I'm talking to you right now, is I think using data now I'm able to clearly measure A, E, and R, but I want to go to the next level to measure my productivity of my CSM. How do I measure the CSM of productivity of the CSMs to know the higher the time that he spends on the platform, I have a better results on A, better results on E, better results on R. And that's the magic sauce, and that's the holy grail we'll get to.
Just to translate, AER, adopt, expand, renew, for those of you who don't know the TSIA framework, so that's
Yeah,
what it means.
so that's where we are getting to. But let me just summarize it by landing the statement. The reason or the driver or the enablement of our transformation is data. Without data, there's nothing with us.
All right, so let's continue with the friction, because I think we can talk about data, and just a show of hands, how many of you have customer data in real time? Daily, weekly, monthly? Good, there's a missing one, which is on demand, but we'll talk about this later. Good, but obviously clarity of data, but let's talk about friction. I claim that language is one of the key barriers to introduce customer success into an organization. Not just introduce, actually get things going. I've experienced that when we did the implementation of the SAP, being able to train some of the participants, not the division that is buying, but actually other people that we were dependent on to understand what we're trying to accomplish. Do you agree? Is the language of customer success clear in the enterprise when we say, not just the term, but all this terminology layer and customer success and adoption and KPIs and value metrics and land and expand and so forth and so forth. Do you feel that we got to a point where the language is there, the organization CEO to bottom has the same language, or
No, not yet.
where's the friction point?
Not yet. I think it's a great point again. Even now, I think last week when I just finished a webinar, and I got a message back from a guy sitting in Chile and Mexico saying, Dilip, I'm not seeing this at all. When did you introduce some of these things? So I can tell you, this is what we see, that the same message, telling it over and over again at every level is such an important aspect, because we assume that we are seeing these numbers every day, and we assume that the seventh level of the layer knows that. No, the answer is no. They're still doing the old way. So we have this enablement program by which we actually lean in. It's called a lean in program, but every level is supposed to do multiple times. They have to tell the same message again and again and again. But if you have to redo things, you have to kill the old way and bring a new way.
But what language do you use? How do you describe it? Go
I
ahead,
would say
Tony.
we used to track in our briefing centers in the tower in San Francisco the number of customers that would just want to come and ask us, how did you build a customer success organization? And every year it went up and up. By the time I left, which was only a month ago, last fiscal year, we had 200 customers come in just to talk about customer success and how did they do it at Salesforce. I do agree language is an issue, because if you get at the C-suite in there and you bring up customer success, they're going to think about customer support or this team in this group. And what we started talking about, and it was great examples I have with many customers, where as soon as you talk about recurring revenue models, changing your digital operating model, changing how you do customer support, changing how you do these things, then you layer in the conversation around customer success, then the light goes off for the CEO. It's very rare today that I feel like you have a CEO who's very progressive. Like, for example, I had the opportunity to work with Mark Benioff and now Chuck, who get customer success. And I think you've got folks like, we had a co-CEO model at Salesforce where they both believed in customer success, but one was more saying, I saw the attrition numbers plummet when we started implementing the principles around customer success, where the other CEO goes, I agree, but is it because we're building better products? Is it because we have better salespeople? Is it because we have top-notch automation? It wasn't that he questioned customer success. It was just a matter of show me the data, kind of show me the money. So I think you have to appease both sides of the equation. Is this customer, the CEO or the CXO who really believes in it, passionate about it, and then the other one's like, show me the money.
So it's the narrative, the data. What's missing?
Well, I think the language, we've definitely gotten better. I mean, if you look 5 years ago, there were wolves in sheep's clothing. I mean, you look at job descriptions of CSMs. On one end of the spectrum, to Tony's point, you literally had, I was going to help with support cases. Well, that's a support engineer. And on the other end of the spectrum, you will go and acquire new customers, which is a salesperson, but they were both titled customer success managers. I think we've gotten a lot better. We still have a ways to go.
We is the top 5%.
Yeah,
we is the
broad
50%.
community. Yeah, we is everybody across
100%.
the landscape. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have a ways to go, but it's certainly gotten a lot better.
What do you think, Keith?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think customer success is still too broad of a topic. And if you were to go to every, say, the top 250 leaders in SAP, I would venture to guess you'd get a multiple different answers of what is customer success. Everything from support to, heck, they used to call my team the renewals team. You know, we were doing the entire customer lifecycle management, but the outcome that the business saw, for the most part, was the renewal, right? Which I actually like that better than the support moniker because that really, I think, limits your ability to get investment, especially in a company like SAP when there is a support function. So, you know, I still think we've got to narrow in and get a little bit closer about it to what customer success means, because it's a broad definition.
Yeah, and imagine what does it mean to build a product that broad.
Yeah. And I mean, I do think that I have thought about that, Guy. I think that's one of your biggest challenges. I
know,
do.
that's why we broke it into blocks where you can break it down and put a name to it. Questions from the audience. You see, I have a lot of good questions, but maybe you can compete. Anyone? No. All right. So let's think about how we, as an industry, got to move it better. We got to move. Second inning. No, I don't know baseball that well, but it's like let's say it's a soccer. 90 minutes. How much in we? 10 minutes? 15 minutes?
We're about a quarter way through the first.
There are no quarters in soccer, but fine.
It's a quarter.
So let's say 25 minutes in, right? So how do we move? I mean, what do we need to do, right? I mean, if you need to give us Totango an advice or TSIA advice, people that are not implementing are trying to figure out how to move this along forward, and that will also help our audience here.
Well,
what would you recommend?
I watched this sort of movie being played out a lot internally and just sort of beating the drum. I think the more you can influence the Deloittes and the Accentures and large SIs who can start telling and embedding this, you think of McKinsey, the management consulting firms, getting them into the space of being able to have a common language that we can, again, they all have their own differentiation, they all have their own business models, but that to me is the shift, because as Salesforce, we were having a conversation, but then who do you hand it off to? Like there's a conversation you and I had, which was, okay, we had 200 conversations, and then they left the room, and what did they do? Who knows, right? They could have gone to you guys, they could have gone to whomever, but sort of no one's really accountable, and I think this is where Totango and others will sort of pick up the slack, and then your partnership with the system integrators and management consultings and make this really part of a business model transformation. Because I can tell you, being a week at Cisco, this group is going to change the whole entire company. And I think you're already seeing some of that as a partner. It's going to completely transform, because the company wouldn't exist if this function wasn't part of reporting to the CEO.
Your experience that you have a day-to-day job description around that.
So I mean, we talked about this a little bit last night at dinner. So what does in baseball the last inning look like? To me, when I think of digital,
No, I actually do know. But
all right, well, I'll start using soccer analogies. We're football.
yeah, exactly. We call it football.
I should say that. Yeah. So what does the end look like? I think when I hear digital transformation, I think we spend a lot of time on the word digital, and I think that's already baked in. I think we as technology companies are already working on a lot of different models around automation, around IT. I think the part that we don't spend enough time is on transformation, and I'm not specifically talking about all of your transformations as suppliers of technology. I'm actually talking about your customers' transformations. So to me, that's sort of the end game of how we're going to, ultimately impact customers' business outcomes and how we're able to help them. Now, has that always been the domain of the Deloittes and the Accentures of the world? Absolutely. I think there is certainly an opportunity for many of the suppliers of technology to play in that space.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, as part of our little check-in package, I saw that you gave everybody a design thinking book, and
That's Edgar's book. Yeah.
yes, yeah, Edgar's book, yes, and you know we use design thinking a lot. We actually use it with our customers a lot to try to boil down to the essence of the problems that they're trying to solve. And you know, I think back to something I said earlier today, if we can take the things that come out of that design thinking type of approach, whether it's us as a software vendor doing it, or maybe even more likely a Deloitte or PwC or McKinsey or whomever, understanding what the business challenge is and then attaching customer success as a component to all of those discussions. So it can be digital transformation. What does that mean? What does it mean for your customers' success? Why are you doing digital transformation? Or is it just purely a cost savings measure? But most of the time today, when you're going through a transformation, you're trying to have an impact on your external customer. And I think if you could build in customer success in terms of what you're trying to achieve for them, and then build that into your customer success organization, then you will have achieved something. But it's to build a platform to track that is if you can do that, that will be big.
Yeah, it could be a big company.
Yeah.
Dilip, what's the end game here?
Monetize data. Data. I'll tell you, monetize data. And what I mean to is, I think the industry is still struggling to evolve the ecosystem. Everybody wants to keep the data to themselves. And I can tell you one thing, a product company has got a data, services company has got a data. You have to start layering these together. And to Phil's point, the transformation with the client is only possible when you start bringing this data together and convert that into meaningful data back to the client. So if a client is now buying a router or a switch or a SAP, we as a system integrator must be talking 10 times to the client, while there are so many products today that is sending so much of telemetry. But if I can't marry them together, the client doesn't see the end game. They will never see the end game. So I think for me the big picture is how do you monetize data. Second is I think the ecosystem has to evolve where there has to be a coexistence, remove the friction and say, look, data has to be exchanged. Without data getting exchanged, you can't do. And third one is we have to start, I was talking to Phil yesterday, we have to start creating offers that can monetize data.
Yeah. So I agree with you, but I think data still needs to be unpacked a little bit. Some of the data is value data, some of it is benchmark data, some of it is customer facing, some of it is internal facing. I've seen, both of your companies are building customer portals, have different names for it, but basically exposing data to customers.
Yeah, and I think monetize data to me means something a little bit different, and maybe it's just some of the background that I have. It's actually trying to sell the insights. I don't think you have to go that far.
No,
you can turn it into what is the value for the customer. That can be how it's monetized. The value of your service, the value of your product. It doesn't mean that you have to actually sell benchmark data or the like.
100%. I think today if you see the world, I think every technology provider is trying to show a client how you can extract the technology value. You have to move from that to an outcome value.
Right.
And the outcome value is not possible if you don't get this ecosystem up and running. Yeah. And the platform providers like you can get the data management and of course all the power of automation, ML, analytics, everything coming together.
So last question for the panel. Positive. Let's leave the panel with a positive note. I think it was great up until now, but let's make it even greater. A lot of these folks here have all sorts of challenges internally, right? If there's like a one magic problem that you have to solve, what is it and how do you solve it? One, only one. Get the IT to agree to provide the data, right?
I'll go first, and I'm gonna try and fulfill your promise to the audience about disagreeing. So I'm going to disagree with maybe something that was prior said, and I don't know if it was opinion more than just what is at that particular company, but I think you have to own revenue. Some way, shape, or form, you have to own revenue. Now, that could be monetizing revenue, right? You're monetizing your customer success offer. That could be some renewals function, whether it's a CSM or renewals capability. If you're a PaaS provider, adoption and expansion may be identical, but our data shows that what that means when customer success owns data is lower sales and marketing costs, higher growth for the company, and the CSM impact is 3x. So there is significant value proposition when customer success owns some piece of a revenue pie. Plus, oftentimes it's direct and easy way to fund your capabilities.
I couldn't agree more. That's what made the shift in 2004 for the last company I worked for. Was basically you're selling packaged solutions and you carve out a percentage that just automatically goes to customer success. And as you renew that customer, then every percentage of renewal that was not anticipated goes to for new initiatives for customer success. And that's where the CEO, the CFO start paying attention. And that was the biggest shift in the company.
All right. So one is, remember that you have to own revenue. What else?
Right.
I mean, it could be the same, and we have like a 4.
Well, no, I mean, that is definitely the biggest one in my book as well, which is why I said before, owning renewals, to me, the retention, revenue retention and growth is without a doubt the key. So for me, if you take it one step above, I don't know if it's above or not, but it is executive sponsorship. And the way you get executive sponsorship is usually, show me the money. I mean, there are not very many executives that are going to write you a check. The CEO, the CFO are usually the two that have the money. They're going to want a financial return. And maybe you can make it work on cost savings on your support costs or cost savings in some area, but highly unlikely. It's got to be top line driven.
Absolutely, yeah. Guy, I think from an overlay, we have to start owning the numbers. I think services folks till now has been seen as the backroom players, cost center players, people who can make the client look good. Whatever is the deal, the services guy is making the client look good. Has to change. The services guy has a seat on the table. He is not shadow. He has to start owning the numbers, which means get the revenues, keep the revenues, grow the revenues, and make it profitable.
Yeah, what's interesting though, and that I think is, I love hearing your perspective, Dilip, because you come from more of a services business. In a company like SAP, we want to control how much of our revenue comes from services,
Correct.
because it's not as profitable as software, right? So for us,
Yeah,
the services, have to be really thought of as how do you deliver it as effectively as possible, because if even selling add-on customer success, it's not that interesting to us other than if we can use it as a funding mechanism to drive software retention, because that's where the margins are in a business like ours. And in fact, even just moving to cloud is hard for a customer like SAP because the margins are lower than what our investor base is driving. So it's just, that's one thing I've really learned from you today and yesterday is the different perspective of a services business. I'm a little envious in some regards.
I would agree, and that's another way of working at software companies. You get sales caring about customer success when you have them sell your product, and your product is people.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much. Very interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tony.
Thank you.
Phil, Keith, Dilip.